Hey there, my friends. We're going to talk about how they recession-proof Vegas. Yes, Las Vegas. Welcome back to another episode of Logistics Life. I'm still having problems saying that, Dean. I'm telling you, brother, it's I get all tongue-tied already from it because I'm so used to saying sales chatter. So how are you, my man?
Good. Yeah, I have struggles with the English language every day, but that's
But if
only
anyone's
because
ever seen me write, or anyone's ever been on the receiving end of my texts or fast emails, yeah, my hands go half as fast as my head, and then I hit
yeah,
send, and I mean, I'm that person where I'll send it, then I'll like the next three texts are me
yeah,
correcting the spelling of the first text. You know what I mean?
I've noticed that. Hey, but have you
Oh, there
noticed how
you go.
hard it is?
You've noticed that.
I've noticed it. No, but I find it hard to since we've all got autocorrect, I find it hard to sit down and actually write now, like to write words on a bit of paper because we've become so used to spell check, auto check, Grammarly checking everything. It's like throw it all on paper and something will check it for us as opposed
hmm
to being grammatically correct out of the gate.
So, uh, full transparency, before I write anything, like if I tend to write like notes to my wife instead of giving her birthday cards. I
Right.
write letters like on pen and paper,
Yep.
and I actually type them out first
Ah,
because I don't want spelling mistakes.
right.
And it's become, I'm going to say, an epidemic for me because I almost have zero confidence. Like I'll write stuff like this, like in my notebook, and
Right.
no worries because I'm the only one that sees it. But if it's
Right.
going out to somebody, I tend
Right.
to
Yeah.
write it in Grammarly first,
Right.
check it, get it
Yep.
to, make it more concise because I tend to ramble, right? Like
Yep.
call a spade, be honest.
Yep.
And it's insane how
Yep.
I'm like, oh,
Yep.
okay, I should say that. Or like annual with one N instead of two N's. And then sometimes I spell it with two L's. But so here's the thing, Dean, and I'd like to jump into this first because you write blogs every week. I write blogs every week. For a while, I started using AI. And I started saying,
Mm-hmm.
okay, here's like my outline, here's my intent, just write me something. Because I
Mm.
also find it's easier to edit than write, and it's faster.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I did that for probably 4 weeks, right? I was doing
Mm.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday blogs. I was doing it 3 times a week for 4 weeks.
Mm.
Um, on week 5, I was like, well, I'm going to write something like just me writing.
Mm.
And I sat there staring at the cursor in Grammarly for about an hour. And I went,
Right.
this is
Right.
crazy. It's kind of like the reverse cameras in
Right.
vehicles now. It's
Right.
like I
Right.
try everything not to look at the camera. I look at my mirrors.
Right.
I use the camera when I first got my truck. I used the camera to understand distances, and I kind of looked in the mirror. But I try not to use the camera because I think even though tech is great, I think it totally destroys the process that keeps us creative, if that makes sense, right? Like, especially when
Well,
it comes to writing blogs. And then what if they decide to get rid of cameras in cars and we're all used to cameras and people can't back up without them? And it's like,
mm.
even
Mm.
to the point where, in my Ford before my truck, I had that button where it parked itself. So you click the button and the car scans for a
Right.
spot, and then
Yeah.
you kind of take your hands off and it says push the gas, the steering
Yeah.
wheel turns. And I used it once and I was like, this
Right.
is super cool. And
Right.
then after that, it was like, okay, well, it's half the time for me just to and do it myself. But I
Right.
could see how people that are nervous parallel parking will use it, but become incompetent in parallel parking completely.
Oh, of course. And I think we've all de-skilled to a degree because of that. You see, there's a whole range of truck drivers who are auto only, can't drive stick shifts.
Yes.
Uh, I was watching a Captain Kate McHugh on one of the big ocean liners, the passenger liners. I think it's a Victory one. Anyway, she does a daily blog, and she said this morning one of the questions she always gets is, "Do you have a sextant on the boat?" And she said, absolutely, we have a sextant, which is the old school way of navigation using celestial objects. and she showed everybody how it is. But she said this is a backup to the backup to the backup to the backup, right? So they've got all this redundancy built into navigation with GPS and all the different things they do, but they still always have that old school method. It's interesting, Dan. I prefer to drive a vehicle, not steer it. And there's a big difference because the more you just relax and steer and let the vehicle do all that stuff for you, you actually disconnect from the driving task. And that's a really dangerous thing to do. So, because when you drive a truck, you've got to drive it. Like you can't just steer a truck. You've got to drive it, which means mirrors, changing gears, all this other stuff. So I'm a proponent for more old school style, just so you've got that redundancy and you've got that skill set, because you can bet. I mean, it's like I carry the Rand McNally massive Atlas in the back of my seat
Yep.
because I'll guarantee you when you get into a spot and you can't get GPS or cell connection or your phone dies, you're going to need the old fashioned map. And so I travel everywhere, Dan, with even my miniature road atlas. I never go anywhere without my road atlas. I sit on a plane and I look out the window and I figure out where we are because I see things spatially. It's how I learn. So I think there's a lot to be said for just keeping some of those old school skills alive.
I'd be it'd be interested to see how many people out there can actually read an atlas these days.
Right. Yes.
Right? Because
Yes.
I mean, I remember old school going on business trips and
Yeah.
at the airport grabbing a map for that area. And by the time,
Yeah.
my career was by the time I moved from Quebec to Ontario, I had stacks and I had an actual box that had all the states and the cities. And
Right.
everyone I went to, I just grabbed that
Yeah.
atlas, throw it in my carry-on, and I'd go to the
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah.
And I
Yep.
remember vividly, like some of them you're opening them up and they're like wider than your arms to find out
Right.
where you're going, and then come time there'd be like highlights in blue and yellow and red and all these different colors for times we were going. I
Right.
remember when we got our first GPS, the family and I went to Florida, and I brought it with me because I was
Mm,
like, this, like there's nothing worse than
mm,
trying to
mm,
figure out where you are, getting lost, taking the wrong exit, going back. And it was one of these things where it was a game changer because I sat there and said, how did we ever get on without this? Right. And
right. Right.
now I probably would take a good half hour to even figure out an atlas at this point. I
Right.
mean, I'm
Right.
sure I could because I've done it so many times, but I'd be looking at it and I just kind of stare and go, okay, hold on here. Now, you're okay. And where am I and how am I? And then looking at the legends and all, I mean, it would be crazy.
Yeah.
Tech,
Speaking of
tech, man.
crazy, Las Vegas.
Yeah. So, yeah, here we go. We're like
Here we
7
go.
minutes in and haven't even talked about Vegas. So, what's happening in Vegas, Dean? Talk to us.
So years ago, Las Vegas got hit really hard during the Great Recession. It got, because we weren't, there was a Great Recession. We weren't traveling. People weren't spending money on gambling because up until that point, Las Vegas was well known for, as a gambling mecca, right? So if you think about all the cheap hotel deals, they did a lot of data analytics around what was the most profitable gambler. Because as we know, Las Vegas is built on losers, right? So because
Yes.
they make money, right? So it's how they do. The most
House always
profitable,
wins.
yeah, the most profitable person back in the early 2000s wasn't the high roller. It was the local resident that was sort of shuffling in with a walker and spending $30 at the machines and buying a bit of lunch and then going home. And it kind of surprised most people because the common folklore was that it was the big high rollers that were the big money makers for the casinos. It was quite the opposite. So once the Great Recession came around, they did a lot of soul searching and they did something really creative. And I talked to, when I was out there in 2018, as they were building the Oakland Athletics Stadium, I was struck by the amount of steel coming in on flatbeds, but struck more by the hundreds and hundreds of flatbeds parked with custom steel beams for the new stadium. And I thought, wow, this is amazing that they're building this new stadium. And I got talking to one of the big real estate guys out there, and he said what Las Vegas did during the Great Recession is they looked at all of the countries, all of the cities around the world, and found out how they recession-proofed themselves. Like what were the things that each of these big cities did around the world to protect themselves from massive downturns in the market. And what they found was the one common link between all of the cities around the world that had recession-proof themselves was sports medicine. And sports medicine is what you'll start to see as a theme that goes all the way through a lot of things that are going on. You know, they've gone from buffets and bingos to recession proofing and a construction boom. And if you start to look at all of the things that are going on there, a lot of it hinges around sport. So you've got the Las Vegas Knights, you've got the Oakland Athletics, you've got the Women's National Basketball Association, Las Vegas Aces. They moved from San Antonio. You've got the U.S. Soccer League, Las Vegas Lights football team. You've got the Las Vegas 51s. You've got a AAA minor baseball team. You've got affiliated with the Mets. You've got UFC. The home of UFC is in Las Vegas, Ultimate Fighting Club, UFC. I think that's what it's called. So all of these teams, Dan, need hospitals and sports medicine facilities, which brings us back to the current construction boom, because the growth of sports medicine in Las Vegas also supports another reason, which is improved healthcare for the aging population that's looking for a warmer climate. So when you connect the dots, what you see is that at the heart of recession proofing a city is sports medicine, because it provides a level of services that sporting organizations need to thrive on, plus the aging population. So what got me thinking about this was, of course, they turned the ground last week on the Las Vegas to Los Angeles rail link for ahead of the Olympics. And my mind went to, holy smokes, there's going to be a lot of inbound flatbed freight and dry van freight and reefer freight into Las Vegas as we head into the Olympics, because of this ongoing construction boom that's going on in and around that city that hinges on sports. And one of the ways they pay for it, I don't know if you've ever stayed there, but when you stay in Las Vegas, they have a resort tax, which is $25 that's added to every room bill, that provides a lot of the cash flow to build these buildings that are going on. So in the next little while, like I said, I'll just rattle off some of the things that they've got going on. You might recall they knocked down the what was the big building they knocked down here recently? The famous dang it, the name's escaping me. One of the more famous buildings that they knocked. Oh, the Tropicana. That's right. They knocked down the Tropicana, which was a 35-acre site, and they're going to put the new Oakland A's baseball stadium there, 33,000-seat ballpark on 9 acres. It'll be a $1.5 billion ballpark, an 18,000-square-foot jumbotron. It'll be the largest in Major League Baseball. That's what they're starting to build now. But on top of that, they've got there's another 43-story, 2,400-room casino project, another theater. There's construction of this 218-mile, $12 billion rail link to Los Angeles in time for the Los Angeles. There's so much stuff going on around Las Vegas. So it's going to turn it, for people saying, where is this going? It's turning into more of an inbound freight market than outbound. And one of the challenges I hear from brokers is and the broker that I talked to said the word pinched, they get pinched trying to find capacity outbound Las Vegas, right? So it means that the capacity that's leaving outbound Las Vegas is turning down loads because the brokers are bidding not high enough for the carriers to want to take it, because it's only 3 hours to Ontario and Los Angeles. If you're a carrier that unloads in Las Vegas, you are not going to hang around all day to get a load for a few hundred miles, right? You're going to get out of that city as fast as you can, and unless you're a broker that's got a customer that can have a one pick, one drop load that loads or unloads in under an hour, you're not going to find a carrier that's going to be remotely interested in outbound loads out of Las Vegas. So this is one of the things that's happening, because one of my predictions is it'll get harder to find capacity outbound Las Vegas as inbound volumes go up, because rates will go up to get in there. So that's one of the things that's happening. I just find that fascinating. On top of that, there's a solar power construction boom in the western states because of all the sunlight. So you've
Yeah.
got so much freight heading out there, Dan. I just find this fascinating that there's so much going on in and around Las Vegas that's related to sport. And of course, the Olympics is the big one in 2028. So it's going to become a really interesting market for a lot of us to, buy capacity in.
Well, I've got a buddy of mine that went to Vegas and saw a Golden Knights game. And
Hmm.
he said, Dan, I've been to a lot of hockey games in my life. He goes, like, no one puts on a show like they
Right,
do in Vegas.
right.
And I think there's a big element to it, right? Is that elevation of what the game is. Like I'll give you a perfect example. So in Ontario, where I live anyways, we have the Guelph Storm. The Guelph Storm game. So it's an OHL hockey league, right?
Yep,
Farm team for the NHL.
yep.
The Guelph Storm is a way more exciting game. The arena is more electric than a Toronto Maple Leafs game, in my opinion.
Really?
Now, some
Yeah.
Leafs fans might want to crucify me and hang me for that, but it's true. I find, especially coming from Quebec, the old Montreal Forum and the Bell Center and stuff, it was like electric during a hockey game.
Mm.
I found Ontario always to be very like mute, and originally I thought it was because it's all corporate. There's no crazy
Right.
people, but um, going to a Guelph Storm game, like our family loves the OHL better than
Mm.
the NHL games. Now,
Mm.
difference when it comes to playoffs and all that kind of stuff, but it's a
Mm.
different feeling in the crowd, and
Mm.
it's that electric feeling that keeps you coming
Right,
back. So I
right.
can see how they would want to put as many sports teams in Vegas as possible. I mean, you look at it and it goes back to like all the magic shows, the illusionist shows, like all of these really entertaining
Hmm.
um, aspects of Vegas above and beyond casinos, because
Yep.
you go there for the entertainment, you're going to spend money in the casinos. Right. Every
Right.
time we go to Casino Rama, we throw 50 or $100 into machines just as like, hey, let's go, and you leave. Right. So
Right.
I can see them, because that will attract more of the non-high rollers that just come in, spend 50, 100, $200 and leave. And tens of thousands of them a day do that, as opposed
Right.
to, a high roller. And I've never
Yeah.
been to Vegas myself. Um,
And all the conferences, you got all the conferences that go there because they can
yeah.
they can handle. It's kind of one of those resort destinations that always attracts a lot of people. Like a lot of
Hmm.
venues that pick conferences, venue management, they to get the numbers there, they need a location, like a strong location that's a draw. And Las Vegas is one of those where you can take your spouse and make a good week of it. Like it's a pretty good location. But then just going back to some of the numbers, like here's where when you're buying capacity, you've got to think about where's the capacity go next once it unloads, right? Because it's not just Ontario to Memphis. It's where do you go in Memphis, right? Where does that carrier thinking about loading from? If you're inbound to Las Vegas, it's only, and here's where you get caught. It's only 230 miles to Ontario to load back out. So the
Mm.
geography of this as a carrier, right? If I'm unloaded in Las Vegas first thing in the morning, I know that by mid morning I can be in Ontario/Los Angeles loading, and by the time evening rolls around, I'm eastbound across I-40 through Kingman, as opposed to still messing around in Las Vegas trying to get a load.
Hmm.
And you see,
Yep,
that's
makes
the
sense.
difference. It's revenue per truck day that you've got to watch. And I think that's where you find a lot of capacity issues. I dug up some numbers on what this means. That just the Oakland A's stadium was supplied mostly by Merrill Steel, who've got a big plant in Springfield and one in Wisconsin. It was one of the biggest orders in history. There was 1,000 truckloads, 1,000 flatbed loads that went of just steel from Merrill Steel to build that one stadium. It's hard to comprehend how much freight goes into that market, but you don't have a lot of outbound opportunities as a flatbed carrier in particular, unless you're hauling part of the drywall out of the big plant nearby. It's just not. It's mostly an inbound port freight port. So I just think that's something to watch. We all tend to think about A to B, but that's not how carriers think.
No.
It's A to B to C, and back to A. There's always another wrinkle in it because it's not just the origin destination for a lot of these markets, and this is what causes imbalance. We had Gary Cornelius from TCW on our show this week, and he was talking about imbalance on the intermodal dray market. And he said what's happening is a lot of shippers on the import side are getting caught with imports out of their core market where they don't have capacity because of the Red Sea crisis, the Panama Canal, the impending labor agreement / potential strike on the East Coast. And he said, so he's seeing a lot of disruption, but what he was seeing was a lot more intermodal containers or international containers being transloaded into 53-foot vans because truckload rates are so low.
Yeah.
But they're out of network, so a lot of inbound freight's coming into markets where the shippers don't have relationships with logistics providers.
Yeah, makes
so
sense.
There's still a lot of ongoing disruption in the market. I was kind of surprised at that, though, Dan, that they're seeing so much disruption in the market still on the import side. I thought that was a fascinating takeaway. But the takeaway that really got my attention was the amount of transloading that had been going on. That was far higher than what I thought. What Gary said was, and he used the example of a lot of 20-footers come in very heavy already, and they get transloaded. He said 320s that are heavy will go into 4 53-foot vans typically, like a 3 to 4 ratio. But on the 53-foot side of it, he said it's pretty much a 1-to-1 relationship. And I thought you'd fit maybe, 3 40-foot boxes into 2 53-foot vans. He said it's more like 1-to-1. 1 40-footer equals 1 53. He said because most of your international 40-foot boxes are coming in 32 to 40,000 pounds already.
Instead of the 55.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really interesting data point on the transloading side. Of course, it's very big on the West Coast, but they're one of the biggest in the Southeast. TCW are one of the biggest drayage companies. So they've certainly got their finger on the pulse in the Southeast.
Definitely. Well, I remember, I don't know if you recall, gosh, 11 years, no, probably more like 2017, 18. There was a big storm that hit Georgia, and Savannah got really hit hard. And I remember we were doing a ton of containers into Savannah, and this company's like chassis were twisted, and there was a whole bunch of things that happened. And just that one piece created an absolute nightmare for like almost 2 months. Things started hitting North Carolina instead of Georgia, and then there was not even close to enough dray companies, and we were looking to transload. I mean, one little blip. And because you got to think, right? If you're a drayage company, you're operating at a specific port. There's not very many companies that have 9 different locations of drayage companies at specific ports, right? Whereas like a truckload carrier will service multiple different lanes. One slows down, one might speed up, and you know what I mean? That kind of thing. It creates a major wrinkle in or a major, it throws a major monkey wrench into your entire operation when things like that happen, for sure.
I asked Gary, what's your lead time on importers? And because I thought it would be in months, and he said 45 days is probably a typical lead time on the ocean side.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, only 45 days because you've got 21 days of transit on the ocean side. So if you're working on a lead time that's fairly tight like that, any sort of disruption on the ocean side is going to cause a ripple effect through your freight network. So I thought that was a really interesting takeaway, and it kind of explains why shippers have got fairly tight lead times. He said what they're doing now, I asked him about the inventory destocking, restocking debate, and he said what he's seeing on the import shipper side in terms of warehouse inventories is because of potential disruptions of the ILA labor agreement. He said Suez Canal problem is going to be with us for a long time, possibly the draft restrictions. He said shippers are looking to have a little bit more inventory than they would normally. So they kind of build their inventories more on the just in case side. So I thought that was an interesting takeaway from our discussion with him this week.
That's interesting. Yeah. I remember we were doing a ton of ocean, close to 4,000 containers a year, and our lead time was 20 days.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it was I mean, we did everything in our power to get the client to give us more lead time, because when
Right.
you're, grabbing 10, 15 containers a day at the port,
Yeah.
you need to schedule that appropriately. And originally, when
Right.
I first got into it, I remember, because this was my first international client, and I was like, oh, that's easy. 20 days. I mean, OTR, you sometimes get 2 hours. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so,
Right.
like, 20 days, I was like, oh, this is a breeze. But it
Right.
quickly realizing that, my Lord, like, you're scheduling it. And if there's any blip, especially in that kind of volume, the freight liner doesn't get offloaded, the freighter doesn't get offloaded and on the day it's
Right.
supposed to. It's like, now you've
Right.
got 15 drivers wait, what I mean? It was, and then it's like, and then the customer wants it yesterday because it was offloaded late, and then,
Right.
issues at ports and getting in and getting out and booking appointments. And I mean, it causes some major ripples if you are not crossing every T and dot in every
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
I. Awesome. What's happening this week, my man?
Um, Pretty quiet week, getting ready to travel. Heading out to see some customers next week, back on the road, doing some sleep classes for some truckload carriers, for some
Nice.
driver groups, getting back into a bit of travel, getting ready for our big broker symposium at Hilton Head. We've got Nicole Glenn from Canada Expedite on the show next week, good friend of ours, you and
Nice.
I and many. She's joining us next Tuesday on her birthday. So I think that's the 8th. We can't forget that day, but always good to have Nicole on. She'll be talking about the new method of shipping LTL refrigerated freight globally. It's a you're probably familiar with it,
Yes,
Dan.
very aware of it. Super
I've
cool.
been I've been waiting for her to give us the green light to talk about it. So we're going to
Yes, I know. So have I. It's been
yeah,
one of those things where I'm like, okay, she showed you it obviously, and I
yeah,
mean, I'm like, I was blown away. I was like, that
yeah,
is super cool. Yeah,
yes,
super cool.
yes.
Yeah. So
So,
talk about giving that inquisitive thing to everybody there. So we'll see you
yeah.
next time, buddy. Thanks, Dean, for
All
being
right.
here, my man.
All right. Thanks. See you soon.